ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Well, hello there, and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial where we are learning more about FileMaker Pro. This is Matt Petrowski bringing you these FileMaker tutorials over at FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video tutorial, we are taking a look at a technique from a fellow developer of mine, Charles Delphs. He has a technique called Better Portal Drag Sort, and you're going to find that over at delphsengineering.ca. Now, there are tons of techniques that are out in the world of FileMaker, these hidden gems, and finding them, you stumble across them, and you are really able to learn from them. So I'm going to break this technique down, and we're going to take a look at how you can sort things in FileMaker within a portal and do it in a better fashion. Let's take a look at the file. Alright, so here we are in the file, and I'm going to show you right off the bat what it does. In fact, if it's not obvious to you already, we can see right here as I zoom in, on the edge or the end of this portal, we clearly have this little drag indicator. Now, the first thing I have to say is Charles is using a PNG with regards to this particular file, and you've got this white outline. It can be made so that this white outline does not actually show, and if you are using FileMaker 14 or higher, my recommendation is that you actually just use a button that it's a do nothing or a does nothing button attached to no script and no single step, but it allows you to use the SVG feature. Now, I'm assuming that because Charles needed this for FileMaker 12 or earlier, maybe you need to use that PNG. If you're going to use a PNG, then of course you can make a PNG with a transparent background, and that will allow the alternating color of the row to actually come through. Now, what we have here is clearly, because of our drag indicator, I can grab any one of these, and the first thing that struck me as unique is the blue line that we have right there, and I thought to myself, oh, now that is really cool. Now, I was familiar with this technique and how it was being accomplished, but Charles has a lot of different ways that modified how this has been done in the past, so that it really is pretty simple to implement into your own solution. But that blue line, I can tell you right off the bat, the blue line is actually a CSS hack. It is something that allows you to control the look of when an object is dragged onto a container so that the on focus or the dropped or the target object of that particular container actually shows one of its borders when it receives a drop or a drag. So if you're unfamiliar with this technique, we are going to break this down in detail and take a look at it. I want to make sure that you know where to grab this. I'll switch over to Safari. Here is Charles' website. In fact, he has a number of techniques that you're able to learn from. You can find those in this section right here, the resources and notes on his website. But of course, what we're taking a look at as I copy this URL and then throw it up on the screen, there is the URL where you're able to get this. It's at /blog 2015 318 Better Drag Sorting, and you'll be able to download this. It's at the bottom of the actual screen right here. There is a Dropbox link that you're going to be able to access in order to download this exact file. So now that we've covered that, let's take a look at the inside of the file and how things have broken down so that you understand how this technique works. That's why you're watching this video. All right, so let's get into the guts of how this works. And the really unique thing about FileMaker is anytime you want to understand what's going on, if you're not selected in any fields and you've exited out, the record is fully committed, and we're just sitting here, if you click on a FileMaker layout, what happens is FileMaker shows these little indications of fields. I don't know if it happens on Windows, but here on Mac, it clearly does. So if I zoom in right now and I click, I can clearly see that I have a number of fields, and all of these fields, as I know, this is going back way to when this technique was originally developed. I don't know who came up with it, but somebody came up with the idea that if I'm going to drag, rather than putting a single container on top of each portal row, I'm going to split it and have two of them, which will allow me to put an item so that I can do an in-between drag. Whereas formerly you had to decide one or the other. If you were going to drag from row 4 here to row 2, you couldn't really decide, does this go above row 2 or after row 2? And so what some ingenious FileMaker developer came up with is, I'm simply going to split these two containers. Now what happens is, what Charles did is he took it a step further. He modified and hacked the CSS of the containers so that when you drag, you actually get that blue line. It is a border that is being turned on based on a container receiving the drag object. In fact, if I move back and forth here, as I do subtly, you can see that I'm now in the top of the container, the top container on row 5. I'm now in the bottom of the bottom container on row 4. We can see that because of that small little subtle difference right there. Now you can attempt to try to get that so that it works and directly, and you only have one solid line, tweak that. But this is just how it turned out in Charles's file. I don't know if he's tried to solve that problem, but it would be nice to just have one single line. But for most users, they're really not going to recognize that. They're going to just drag really quickly, and they want that to happen. Now there's another nuance of this particular technique, and that is that in order to drag something from a container field, that container field must contain something. So what I'm doing is I'm giving you all of the different pieces to the puzzle before we actually dive into the script. Charles has done a great implementation in that he's made this so easy to implement. You really only need one field and one script, and as long as everything's in the right place or named the right way, you should be able to copy it pretty easy. In fact, there is an integration tab on the technique file that you can read in order to integrate and follow the steps that he's provided there. The container field needing to contain an object is quite easily solved with an auto enter calculation, and we're going to take a look at that. But for the most part, I've given you all of the fundamentals of how this technique primarily works. We have a container above, we have a container below, in other words, two containers on a portal row. No matter where you click, you're clicking in either the top one or the bottom one. That really doesn't matter because what's received when you click into the container and start to drag is the contents of the row itself. Anything that identifies the row, such as the portal row and the ID value and pieces of information that allows you to determine, okay, if this is going to be 4 and it's going to be placed after 7, then we're going to name this something like 7.5 and then re-serialize all of these serial numbers or these sequence numbers so that you know what's going on. Now, that is a critical part of this technique. You must, in your child records or in your table that is being shown through the portal, you obviously have to have some type of numerical field which allows you to sort that portal. If I go into layout mode and I double click on the portal, then of course we can see currently that we are showing our records from the child and that the sort is turned on. If I click on the sort, we can see that quite clearly right here, the sort index is the field. Now in some of my solutions, I will name this field delta or I will name it sequence in order to indicate that these are values that are being used in order to control sorts. As long as we turn that sort on the portal, then the portal will sort according to that delta value, that sequence sort index, however you want to call it, and that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Now, the only other part of this technique that you may be confused about, if you haven't used them, are script triggers. So right here on each of these, you can see I've clicked on the top container and the bottom container. Both of them have an onObject script trigger, and it's the same on both of them, of the containers. It is an onObject modify calling the script drag sort portal local. Now the reason that Charles has made the script named drag sort portal local as I've opened up the script workspace is because he's made it so that this particular technique will work whether you're working on the local file or you're using the separation model. So there's two different variations of the script, but you're only going to need one of them depending on how you've structured your solution. So if we're going to walk through the actual process by using the debugger, we can take a look at that. But before we do, remember we had to have something in the container itself no matter what, and the containers themselves are also playing a critical role in terms of presetting some values that we need. Whenever we click into a container, on a portal row, we need some pieces of information as the start of our drag process. In other words, we need to know what has the user clicked on, and when they drag it, where is it ending up? So we've got those two different pieces of information. Well, Charles has solved this in a really creative way, and we're going to find that in the defined database. So when we go into the defined database, you're going to see that we need at least one container, and just like there are two scripts, one for the separation model and one for a local model, there are two containers that we're going to find in our child record. There is the ZZ drag sort target and ZZ drag sort target separation model. Again, you only need one of these two different containers depending on how you are implementing. But if we take a look at the, for example, the drag sort target, because we're in the local file, when we look at the calculated auto enter calculation for this field, this is where we're going to see some of the creativity that comes into play with regards to how Charles is implemented. In particular, what's happening is on the start of the drag, he is setting some global variables with some critical pieces of information. In particular, we're taking the ID value, or in this case, the field name of the child ID, and we're also taking the field name of the sort index because we're going to need those values. And those values are actually set. You can see that within the data viewer when you're debugging the script. Now here is where Charles is actually differentiating whether this is using the separation model or not. He's doing it via another global variable. And you can turn this false or true. And that's why he has the different variant. But down here, you can see, after we've got the drag sort ID, if you're not familiar, the first thing he's doing right here is he's actually getting the name of the field, which is child ID in this case. That's the ID of the child record as related from this parent record. This right here of get field, getting this global variable, is a degree of abstraction. In other words, he's saying up here, what's the name of the field, and then what is the value that I want? Or in this case right here, this is actually referencing this field right here. I almost thought that it was referencing this one, but he's basically saying I'm storing in a global variable, I want the field name, I also need the field value. In order to get the field value, he's setting the second global variable right here using the getField function. Hopefully that makes sense in terms of how I'm trying to explain it. He's grabbing two different pieces of information about the field. The name of the field, and then also the value of the field. This gets the name, this gets the value. So hopefully that makes sense. He also needs the portal row number, because within the script, you need to know what is the portal row number that we're starting on, and then he's going to loop through all of the different portal rows. Now here's the creative thing that Charles has done. He is actually using or directly embedding all of this base 64 code, which is a transparent object that he has quite aptly named blank.png. So this blank.png is how he's filling the container field so that the container field has something. It happens to be transparent so we can see through it underneath everything so that we can see what's going on. The containers, remember, because you're dragging them, have to be on top. And down here at the bottom, he's got a case statement, the result of this let, that says, if the self is equal to empty, then we're going to have the image. Otherwise, we're going to have the image. Now, here's a little point of contention that I have with regards to this. The case statement for some FileMaker users, newer users, can be a little bit confusing, because case in this situation, which case in FileMaker is reflective of a switch statement in a lot of other programming languages, where you have multiple different conditions or multiple different conditions and results that can happen. In this case, Charles is really only using one. So we would be able to change this to an if condition that says if self is equal to blank, then image, otherwise image. Now that's basically the exact same thing. This is directly the same thing as that right there. The one thing that I really like about the if statement, if you have not used it, is it does not require this second parameter. You can use an if and have it result in just the one thing. And what will happen in that case is if I was to say if self is blank, then be image. Otherwise, if it had anything else, it would actually become blank because the if would return nothing in this case. Without the default, an if will return null or nothing. I don't know if it's exactly null, but that's just a little sidebar right there in terms of the case versus the if. And case is used a long time because the if statement, historically, if you want to know, did not have the ability to have that missing parameter. And developers just got used to using the case statement for the fact that you could do with the case statement what I just showed you with the if. You could have a case, one condition, one result, no default result. But if that was added in at some point in time. So that's just a little historical fact there about FileMaker if you've recently joined FileMaker, and sometimes it's helpful to know. So the last thing that we need to do now is take a look at the script and actually walk through it, because all of the logic that makes things happen here in the solution is all within the script, and that's what we're going to do next. All right, so now it's time for us to break things down and walk through the debugger on a drag. We know that we're getting an onObject modify, so that when we click and drag and drop into another, a script will be triggered and we'll be able to see what's going on. Now the script over here, as I scroll really quickly, is only a total of 99 total steps, including spaces, obviously. But what it's doing primarily is it's looping through all of the different rows after it has taken and captured that row. Now remember, the row is initially captured as part of the auto enter calculation when the calculation for the container is reevaluating itself in order to set itself to just a blank transparent icon or a PNG file. So we're going to bring up the debugger and the data viewer, which I've done on screen right there, both of them. And I'm going to do a very simple drag. I'll drag from the top container to dragging Susan in between Doug and Charles so that she becomes position number 2. So when the script is invoked, we can see right off the bat that what has happened is our values that were part of our auto enter calculation have conveniently been captured. In fact, down here we can see that we've got, let me zoom in so we can see it, we've got the drag sort target ID. That's the ID of the person that was initially selected. The portal row number. I dragged the row number 1. Also here again are the field names. The field name of the sort field name that's going to be used. And then he's also got this value of the separation model that was set in that auto enter calculation on the container. Now remember, the container itself is basically the exact same thing. There is not two separate containers. The top container is not different from the bottom. It is just another copy of that container, which allows you to actually have the difference there of dragging in between so that you know whether it goes to the top of a row or the bottom of a row. So as we walk through, although I should mention the containers themselves, they do vary in their formatting. It is their styling that is different in terms of their borders. So if you're going to copy this solution, you're going to have to always deal with a blue line or using a blue line unless you are willing to go in and hack the CSS yourself. Charles also does give some variants in his file, and we'll take a look at that, but let's walk through with the debugger so that we can quickly see what happens and take a look. So the first thing that we're doing is he's grabbing some variables, all of these different, and that's only if those come in. This never actually executed. He has a toggle right here. I actually did not go through every single detail of all of this in order to break it down and understand it. His descriptions will probably give you clues, but here we have the main chunk of the script, and that's where we're going through a loop, and you'll see that he's looping through all of the different records. In fact, if we briefly read this, we can see that the only parameter that he's really bringing into this script via the get script parameter, which we will see right here, is which one, depending on which one you drag, where the drop actually happens, you're actually taking a before or an after. So that's right there. It is either a before or it is an after. So that's to break things down as simply as possible. That is the only thing that's coming into this script. Everything else was already preset as part of the auto enter calculation, or is coming from somewhere else. We can see that right here because these are a very familiar drag sort target ID that was in the auto enter calculation. This one, and this one also were in the auto enter calculation. Now all he's doing here is he's setting locally scoped variables equivalent to those globally scoped variables. So in other words, he's bringing the scope from a global scope of global variables into a local scope. And there's a reasoning behind that. Since I didn't create this, I don't know why that is, but that's exactly what's happening. So as we watch right here, what happens when these variables get set, drag sort. So we're just moving that global into that local, but here is our one parameter that's coming in. It is a before versus an after. That's going to control within the loop what's actually going to happen. He goes to the very first portal row. Now there's one thing that I have to say about this implementation of this particular technique. Many times in a FileMaker solution, you may have multiple portals on the same layout. If you simply use this one step of go to portal row, the portal that FileMaker will target first is the portal that is lowest in the layout stacking order. So if you have two portals on a layout and you have sent one portal to the back of all other objects, that's the portal that will be targeted using the go to portal row. In order to ensure that this does not happen, the solution to this is to either target a field within the portal that is unique to that portal and does not appear on any other portals, or to identify the portal via a named object and giving the portal itself a name, and then using the go to object step instead of the go to portal step. That's where you're going to get a specific targeting of the exact object that you want. And again, the go-to field is a great way to actually enter into objects in FileMaker if you don't want to give those objects a name. Say, for example, you've got a popover. That popover has a field within it, and the only place that field appears is in the popover. If you use a go-to field, FileMaker is obliged to go to that popover, open it for you, and you don't actually have to use the go-to object. A nice little trick there. So as we turn that off, we can continue to step through. We can see that we're setting a variable of our counter. This is for our loop, which is going to start right here. And now what's going to happen is we're simply going to start to walk through all of these different rows, determining if the resulting row that we end up on is where we want to move the value and be able to get that data. And the before and after are the two chunks of this loop that are actually going to do the resetting for us. So as we move down here, we're going to see that it's just going to go to the next portal row. That's the default bottom step, and it's going to keep moving down. Right here, because I made a simple drag from here to here, if I had dragged this, we'd be cycling through the loop a lot more. But in fact, the loop has to go through all of the different rows. There might be something that Charles could do in order to shorten this, that after one of these two actions has actually been hit, there may be no need to continue to loop through the rest of the portal, which can be quite costly if you have a lot of portal rows. So we go to our row, we're going to hit one of them, and there we hit it right there, our before. So based on our drag on the containers that we had pulled down and which one we had dropped into, we hit the before. We want it to be before Charles, which is going to reserialize this. We're going to see that we're going to set the field. We're going to set our counter variable. He increases that by 2 because we're not simply just advancing to the row again. And go to the row. And what's going to happen is, as a result of all of our loop, because you'll see that he's going to loop through the whole remainder of this portal. The operation has already been run because the before, the else if was triggered on the before. And I'm going to simply advance through the loop. We've got our record missing right here, which means we hit our last portal row and we exited after our last. He's setting the field, doing some cleanup, and then here he's clearing out all of his global variables and then we're finished up. And the drag actually happened, and it moved Susan, which was formerly at row number 1, in between Charles and Doug, making her row number 2. And the great thing is it works in reverse. Obviously, no matter where you drag, what container you pull from, you can completely reorder these however you want. As I mentioned, there are multiple different hacked versions of the containers that Charles has provided. You can see those in this section right here on sample targets. These sample targets, you can see when you drag them, he's got a container with modified CSS for the drop target tag. That is, here we've got a pink version. Here you've got a modified red version. Here you've got an offset with a shadow box, and here is another offset. But of course, the very subtle blue is a really nice trick. Now he's got some different variations in here. All of them are pretty much, how the technique works, it's the same on all of them. In this one, I'm clicking in the row. The containers are not dragged, they're not across the full width of the row. Going into layout mode, you can see that they are simply split across the drag handle graphic container, or the graphic that's the drag handle. So if we go into browse mode and look at that one, this one simply has a little arrow. So he's changed the drop target and made CSS so that it shows a little arrow if you want it to go above or below. You can also turn this on and off by simply using FileMaker's hide feature. If you don't want users to be able to drag this unless they have a certain level of permission, you can use something that will control that based on their privilege set or whatever it is that you want. Here we've got toggling, and it actually turns these on and off. Of course, when you toggle this, he's not just hiding the actual drag handle, he is also hiding the containers, so that here I would be able to interact with these fields. One point would be, if I wanted to be able to edit this data, then I would be able to edit it in this mode. If I wanted to sort it, then I would be able to turn on the sorting. That's a very iOS-specific feature. One thing I did notice in Charles's file is if I turn on my digital color meter, and I use this for zooming in on files, if you zoom in right here on each row, you're going to see this little graphic artifact right here. And it actually turns out that that is a popover. And it is a popover that would allow you to edit data if you wanted to. You could quite clearly put a little button here that would be like a pencil icon, click on that, go to a particular object, which is a popover, open that up and allow editing that way. You can also use the little pencil icon, and one of the great things is FileMaker, when you put the focus on a field, that field will get the focus. So for example, if I go into layout mode on this item name, if I was to target the item name and explicitly go to that field, even if this field, and if you do it within the context of a script, if this field, when I select it, over in the inspector under the data tab, if it has the field entry turned off, which in this case it does, this field has field entry turned off for find mode and browse mode. When you script going to that field, the script doesn't care whether the field entry is turned off. It will allow you to go into that field. So you could very easily put a little pixel icon, a little icon of the edit target, use a script that goes to the field of the field name and allows the user to edit without actually making it a clickable field that they could enter. So that's a good thing to know if you want to be able to provide the user with some ability to edit. But ultimately what we have here is a very ingenious, very simple and easy to copy technique. All you're going to need to do is copy one field, one script, set things up, and as long as you do it in the right order according to this integration that Charles has mentioned here, you're going to have a very cool solution for drag sorting your portal. So as always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.